Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first for our two games this week is 2016's Batman the Telltale Series, the Caped Crusader's first season of a point-and-click adventure game from the company that reinvigorated the genre, with a stellar cast and clever twists on the storied franchise's lore.
Following that is one of the most beloved games for the Game Boy Advance, one that sees a group of kids transported into another world for tactical RPG action, 2003's Final Fantasy Tactics Advance.
I think a theme this week would be critical decisions. I mean, totally different genres between a strategy RPG and a point-and-click adventure, but Telltale's also known for those tough choices. But these are also really different genres compared to what the franchise is primarily known for. When you take Final Fantasy and go to more of a checkerboard layered strategy RPG, and then Batman, you're used to, the Rocksteady games, open world, action adventure, beat 'em up, and then it's just like, oh, point and click Batman. It's just an interesting blending of games this week.
Yeah, I don't know. I was very curious as to how we were gonna theme these two together, and honestly, nice job. I never would have thought either of those, but I think they work pretty well.
Yeah, I think so. Let's give you all a heads up that not in the mood to talk composer follow-up news this week. It's kind of disheartening to live through yet another once-in-a-lifetime events in our lifetimes. Basically stand with Ukraine. That's insane what's going on in the world right now.
Go find game studios that have promised to give a bunch of their stuff to Ukraine. I believe the developers behind This War of Mine have pledged that for the next 7 days as of yesterday at time of recording. So if you're listening to this at release, I believe the window is still open. They will give 100% of profits for This War of Mine to Ukrainian relief efforts. So there are multiple studios that are doing that kind of thing, and you should 100% look into them, buy those games, and otherwise, find some of the lists of the aid funds that you can just give directly to, even if you don't get a game out of it. Give it a shot, give your support. This sucks.
Yeah, just do your research and make sure it's legitimate and it's not going to fall in the wrong hands, to be honest. So yeah, we'll get back to you with game industry news next time. Just not feeling it this week. On a brighter note, Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I mean, I'm doing about as well as you can when, the fifth once-in-a-lifetime thing has happened now in my life. In the past, 2 years?
I think I saw something that was third in the last 5 or something. It's ridiculous.
Oh, God. I'm doing all right. It's mostly been playing more Pokemon. I've been slowly, methodically working my way down, getting level 10 on all of the Pokedex entries. I've been going number by number, and I made it to Basculegion last night. So, man, talk about a Pokemon with a really stupid method of evolving.
That's just where I got to I'm not doing the level 10 yet, but I'm just making sure on the catch, at least have it registered in the Pokedex. I'm 40 hours in, 216, 218 caught. I know there's I think it's 242, I think is that magic number. But yeah, I just got to Basculegion as well and got that done. That's weird. That's definitely weird. I think Ursaluna is weirder though.
Ursaluna is weirder simply because, hey, most of the maps you can't see the moon even at night. It's just not there. But I've also been playing Kingdom Hearts Integrum Collection on Nintendo Switch, the cloud version. I'm currently playing through them on cloud. Not all the way. I don't think I'm going to finish any of these games. But I'm playing a good chunk of all of them, and then I'm going to put together a review/feature about them for NWR. But needless to say, here's my initial review. They suck. Don't buy these versions.
Yeah.
They don't work. I lost the race to Riku because I couldn't walk in a straight line.
Sick.
I got more trounced by Riku in that race than I've ever gotten in my entire life. Yet also I was able to beat Riku in the fight, which is weird. So yeah, look forward to hearing more about that. It's bad. Otherwise, it's just been about demos. The Steam Next Fest ended yesterday at time of release. I've been playing a bunch of demos as usual. A lot of them not super worth talking about. But one that I really enjoyed was for a game called Beacon Pines, which is a little adventure game where you pick up like keywords and stuff, and you can use those keywords to change different like branching paths and stuff, depending on how it makes the main character act, etc., etc. Had a lot of people comparing it to Night in the Woods. I don't think it's quite the same tone, but it is very similar. So I would encourage people to go look at that. But also, I have one demo that I haven't played yet that I'm going to talk about next week, because I will have by the time we record. It's called My Friendly Neighborhood, and it was described to me as a survival horror game that takes place on Sesame Street. And I don't know what that means, but I'm going to find out, and I'm excited to find out.
Interesting. Yeah, it's always impressive how many demos you churn through, that's for sure. So yeah, I've been playing Pokemon, but that's really all I've been able to do, because big, real adult things, we sold our condo.
Yeah.
And so the first half of that is done. Hopefully we wait another month before we close and move on to a new place. So exciting stuff. May somehow get Elden Ring as a rental pretty early on. Elden Ring is out today as of time of recording. Music by Yuka Kitamura. We covered her in episode 95. So there's that. So thanks, Gamefly. Not sponsored, but shout out.
Yeah, absolutely shocked that you're going to get that. That doesn't seem correct. It seems like that was a glitch or something, but hey.
I'll take it. All right, let's talk about our first game this week, and it is Batman: The Telltale Series. Telltale Games. How is this our first game from Telltale that we've covered on the show? So I think with that in mind, it's important to give a little background history about Telltale Games as a developer. It was founded by former LucasArts developers in 2004, who jumped ship from that company after the developer decided to stop making adventure games, which had been their bread and butter for years. We've talked about Grim Fandango. That was kind of one of their last big ones. And so Telltale started out with making point-and-click adventure games based on smaller intellectual properties such as Sam and Max, Wallace and Gromit, and Homestar Runner. But eventually they landed bigger fish around 2010 with Back to the Future and Jurassic Park. And then the Megaton came with 2012's critical darling, Telltale's The Walking Dead. A very influential game that would shape adventure games like this for the rest of the decade. And it would really be because of this approach to customizing a player narrative through player choice. So as a result, the franchises would continue to roll in as Telltale Games got bigger and bigger. There was Fables, Minecraft, Game of Thrones, Borderlands, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Batman. However, the company arguably got too big too quickly. There was a management shakeup in 2017 that kind of spelled trouble for the company, and by fall 2018, which was in the middle of the fourth and final Walking Dead season, by the way, like they had already released a couple episodes, they were trying to work on the last couple, plus there was also like pre-production on a second Game of Thrones season. There was The Wolf Among Us 2, and a secret planned Stranger Things game on the way. But yeah, out of nowhere in fall 2018, the company shutters out of nowhere, with a mere skeleton crew remaining to fulfill ongoing contractual obligations. So many assets were later acquired by LCG Entertainment, which revived the Telltale Games name as part of its business in August 2019, and they kept many of the company's licenses and offered former staff freelance positions. Currently, Telltale Games is working on publishing The Wolf Among Us 2 in 2023, and they're starting work on The Expanse, a Telltale series, which is going to be developed by Deck 9, who last worked on Life is Strange True Colors. So there are some people who are like, they're glad that at least Telltale is back and working on The Wolf Among Us 2, but some people are like, never forget, boycott Telltale. It's not the same. So it's a very mixed bag. So we go all the way back to 2016 with Batman the Telltale Series, which was released in 5 episodes from August 2nd, 2016 to December 13th, 2016. That's a pretty good clip to churn out those episodes, honestly. And it was released on PC, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3, Xbox One, Xbox 360, iOS, and Android. The Telltale Batman Shadows Edition remastered the first season and its second season sequel in one package. And this was from the Telltale Games Resurrection. Try to make money off of the licenses they had by remastering these games. And so this released on December 17th, 2019 on PS4, Xbox One, PC, and Nintendo Switch. The game is developed and published by Telltale Games, and it is an episodic point-and-click adventure game. You navigate 3D environments in third person to interact with objects or characters. You get to make decisions on how to respond in conversations, complete QuickTime event button presses in action sequences. The story generally plays out pretty linearly, but there are some different wrinkles with it if you decide to approach things as Bruce Wayne or Batman. And also, your relationships with different characters develop differently based on how you interact with them. What is the story of Batman the Telltale Series? We take the opening salvo from Wikipedia, quote, "While responding to a break-in at the Gotham City Hall, Batman engages in combat with a group of mercenaries and Catwoman, the latter having broken into the mayor's safe and stolen a drive. During the fight, Batman steals the drive while she manages to escape. Returning to Wayne Manor, Bruce endorses Harvey Dent's mayoral campaign against Hamilton Hill, during which he meets crime lord Carmine Falcone. While investigating and decrypting the drive, Bruce receives word from his butler Alfred that his childhood friend Oswald Cobblepot, now a criminal called Penguin, has returned to Gotham. Meeting up in Cobblepot Park, Oswald warns Bruce of a revolution in Gotham. So the big questions are, who is behind Cobblepot's revolutionary organization, the Children of Arkham? What are they planning? And what do Bruce's late parents have to do with all of this? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Batman the Telltale series, or Telltale in general?
I have played 2 Telltale games, being The Walking Dead and The Walking Dead Season 2, and none others. I don't even think I finished Season 2. I don't remember. I kind of fell off on them pretty quick, mostly because, as their story tells, they came out with a lot of stuff very quickly.
Yeah.
All hoping to recapture that flame of the original first season of Walking Dead, and none of them really ever did, financially at least.
No, yeah.
Batman's one of the ones that I've heard is pretty good, as well as, obviously, The Wolf Among Us. Tales from the Borderlands I've heard is also very good, but I just have never really felt the desire to jump into it. I'm pretty sure I own this game on at least 2 platforms because of maybe PlayStation Plus might have been part of a big Steam sale or a bundle or something. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I own it somewhere, maybe 2 somewheres. So maybe this will convince me to load it up and give it a shot. Who knows?
Yeah, it was a game at the time where the first episode was released for free. try to get you to play the rest and buy into it. I've played a lot of Telltale games. Not all. Certainly, I didn't play Minecraft story mode. I have, but I didn't play Game of Thrones. Heard kind of mixed things about that one. But I like a lot of their games. Like the ones that you mentioned that are really good. Yeah, they are really good. But I think it's something where you got to really appreciate the narrative storytelling more than like gameplay and action.
Oh yeah, the games play rough, and they only got rougher as time went on because one of Telltale's problems was they didn't update their engine. Ever.
Yes and no. It's kind of mixed there.
Yeah, but for the most part, it was kind of a problem when moving forward to new consoles, because they kind of just, especially console versions of their games, problems sort of existed every single time, and it was weird. Speaking of Minecraft story mode, did you know Patton Oswalt plays the main character in that?
I did know that, yes.
I don't know why I know that.
It's a weird pull, but yeah, kind of deep in the brain there, for sure.
I assume something to do with, like, his kid must be a fan of Minecraft or something, I don't know.
Maybe, hey, whatever pays the bills. But this game is one of those ones where it's like, the reviews aren't too hot on it, but I really enjoy it. I think I've played through it 2 to 3 times to like show different people. The second season, I think, is better, but I didn't like as much. There's something about this first season where like it's setting up the world, and I really, really enjoy that. I think, Joe, if you like Batman things, movies, etc., I think you'd really enjoy this. There's a lot of great performances in this game.
I do enjoy a good Batman thing. Though, I don't know, the past few years have been kind of burnt out on Batman, what with the, like, 3 bad movies, and I haven't heard anybody talk critically about the new movie yet, but I'm gonna assume it ain't super great.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that one, yeah.
Yeah, Robert Pattinson needs a win on that, I feel like, but also, like, I'm finding it difficult to, like, get excited for Arkham Knights.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, I don't know, there's so much Batman that I'm starting to feel like there's too much Batman, if that makes sense.
I getcha. So, I was surprised by how little there seemed to be as far as research goes, but let me share what I did find. The game was rendered using a non-photorealistic style. It's almost like cell shading in a way, kind of trying to emulate a comic book style, and it's pretty neat when you compare it to games that from Telltale that tried to be a little more photorealistic. Like the Game of Thrones one really suffered for it to try to look photorealistic, but it was inspired by comic artists Jim Lee, Greg Capullo, and Neil Adams. In order to meet this, Telltale updated its game engine.
Oh.
They had used this engine called the Telltale tool for a while, and it was starting to show its faults. So they did update it to produce improved rendering results. It was also the first game in Telltale's library to fully implement the new tool.
All right, I'm just going to see myself out there.
It's amazing what research we'll find here. And this included physics-based modeling and support for DirectX 11. Now, by the end of Telltale, I think they were trying to move to Unity as a result, but I think that came way too late. So I think that's kind of where you're pulling from. As a result of this, though, because of all the projects that Telltale had going on and working on this new version of their engine, the development schedule was rushed, and it led to some initial bugs. That's putting it mildly and lightly. On release, some of them would be fixed a few weeks later. The team said that they wanted to meet the maturity levels that was found in their previous titles, The Wolf Among Us and The Walking Dead. I think they did an okay job with that. It's not so dark, but it has its dark moments, this Telltale Batman game. It was also notable, though, for including a new feature called Crowd Play, which was available on both the PC and console versions. Crowd Play allowed the game to be watched by an audience who can participate in the decision-making process. When the feature is active, the player provides their audience with a link to Telltale's website with a unique code to participate in that session through any web-enabled device. The additional players are given the option to vote at the game's decision points, with the results presented to the main player to judge which decision to make. Optionally, the main player can also have the game just automatically take the most popular decision for them, because Telltale famously, at the end of episodes, would show you the percentage breakdown of all their players and what choices the big player base made. It is an incredible voice cast, though. To rattle off some names, it's Troy Baker as Bruce Wayne, Laura Bailey as Selena Kyle, Travis Willingham as Harvey Dent, Jason Spisak as Oswald Cobblepot, who is much different than I think Cobblepot has ever been portrayed if you just look at the character's appearance. There's Dave Fennoy as Lucius Fox. Famously, he is Lee from The Walking Dead. Steve Bloom as Lady Arkham. Richard McGonigal as Carmine Falcone. Aaron Yvette as Vicky Vale. And Anthony Ingruber as John Doe. Gave one of the standout performances of the season. Had the whole next season kind of devoted to his performance and his character. He's an actor that was famous before this for being in a movie called The Age of Adeline with Blake Lively and Harrison Ford. It's like a time-traveling romantic movie. But Anthony Ingruber does this killer Harrison Ford impression and was cast specifically to be a young version of Harrison Ford. This was at the time right before Solo was coming out, and people were like trying to petition him to be the young Han Solo, but that did not happen. Reviews for the full season were mixed, with Metacritic averages of 64 on PC, 68 and 67 on PS4 and Xbox One respectively, and then eventually 72 on the future Switch port. Critics praised Telltale's updated engine, the action sequences, atmosphere, and the portrayal of the titular character. However, the storytelling and the presence of various technical issues was criticized. There aren't really any confirmed sales estimates out there. There are some estimates of about 200,000 to 500,000 owners on Steam. This could be a factor with the free first episode, but then this also doesn't account for all of the other platforms, which also had a similar promotion. Or even then re-releases of this Shadows edition, the remaster. So can't really tell how much. I think it'd be an accomplishment if it broke like 1 million, though. And then, with all of its issues, no awards. You would have thought that like a character, maybe nomination somewhere, but nothing was seemingly noted for awards for this game. It was good enough, though, to get a sequel from Telltale, and this would be called Batman: The Enemy Within, and it was released episodically from August 8th, 2017 to March 27th, 2018 across all major platforms. It reviewed better, with a Metacritic of 80, and it's praised for giving the player control over how the Bruce Wayne relationship with John Doe develops from start to finish. Now, fan demand exists for a third season, which the current iteration of Telltale notes that they're aware of, but we're currently busy with The Wolf Among Us 2, so stay tuned. Honestly, wouldn't surprise me if they try going towards a different IP. It ended at a good point where they didn't need to continue it, but honestly, would not mind more Telltale Batman. The composer for this game and many Telltale games is Jared Emerson-Johnson. And Jared Emerson-Johnson was born on October 13th, 1981 in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. His passion growing up was music. I mean, he played games, but that wasn't really like his big focus. And he's actually classically trained in conducting, violin, and voice. He graduated from Cornell University. He began his career as an assistant to composer Clint Bajakian on the score for the 2003 LucasArts game Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. It was basically like an internship. He was still in college, but he worked with him for a few months in the summer and then went back to school. Well, Bajakian would eventually move on to work at Sony. So Jared essentially was on good terms with the people at LucasArts and inherited his position, essentially. Also did some other work involving sound design, voice directing, and even some voice acting. Today, he is the music supervisor and lead composer at Bay Area Sound, an audio production company specializing in sound design, music, and voiceover for video games. In his spare time, he also teaches musical theater and opera performance to young singers. And he is also the frontman of the Rivertown Skifflers, a Northern California-based jug band.
Okay. All right. You know what? Yeah, I'll take that.
When we can find it in interviews, we try to see if there's any advice that the composer may have for those in the industry. And he says, the only way to get better is just to keep working hard and do it. But also, no one is ever going to tell you to make sure to make time for yourself. So, know your limits. His favorite Nintendo game is Super Mario World. So, just as a little neat personal take there. His discography is very impressive because it's a lot of Telltale games, basically all of the Telltale games, plus a few games here and there. So as far as music composition, there's The Bard's Tale, Sam and Max Save the World, Alien Syndrome, Sam and Max Beyond Time and Space, Strong Bad's Cool Game for Attractive People, Wallace and Gromit's Grand Adventures, Sam and Max The Devil's Playhouse, Poker Night at the Inventory, Back to the Future, the game, Puzzle Agent 2, Jurassic Park, the game, Telltale's The Walking Dead, Poker Night 2, The Wolf Among Us, The Walking Dead Season 2, Tales from the Borderlands, Game of Thrones, a Telltale game series, The Walking Dead Michonne, Batman, the Telltale series, The Walking Dead, A New Frontier, Batman, The Enemy Within, Guardians of the Galaxy, the Telltale series, The Walking Dead, the final season, Sam and Max, this time it's virtual, I Expect You to Die 2, The Spy and the Liar, and he is working on music for The Wolf Among Us 2. He also did additional sound design for LEGO Star Wars 2, the original trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, Knights of the Old Republic, Psychonauts, and James Bond 007, Everything or Nothing. Also, he had a credit of being a sound editor on Firewatch.
Hey, that game has good sound.
It does. So, a vast discography there for Jared Emerson-Johnson, but no information seemingly out there for development history about the Batman soundtrack. A lot of interviews with Jared Emerson-Johnson, but none really covering this game, which is interesting because there are certain tracks that stand out to me, and let's cover them in the 5 critical tracks for Batman, the Telltale series. We start with Batman. So this is the main theme, as you might guess, from a track titled Batman. Also, it doesn't seem like there was a soundtrack release for this game, so it's a lot of PC rips that got broken out into tracks. Like, there are a lot of tracks that are like, you know, loop, numbered this, and it's like really interesting to see how people have broken it out. Like, not really a traditional soundtrack release that we've seen. But there is this one for sure, and it's definitely the main Batman theme that you hear as far as the character theme goes. The leitmotif is also used in the pause menu. And so if you pause the game and you're trying to rack your brain over, you know, a big decision to make, like, this music kind of fades in and gives you that epic feeling. Like the strings and the orchestra sounds great here. Eventually choir comes in. It sounds so good. And this is the main one that I remember from this game because it's just a great Batman theme. I think Jared Emerson-Johnson did a wonderful job, at least nailing it. I mean, beyond this, of course, but nailing this one. Like, to believe in the Batman theme for a Batman, any media property is a tough thing, and it's got to be done really well.
How could there be more music beyond this? Batman Beyond is a different property. Didn't. I can hear a lot of DNA from Hans Zimmer's Dark Knight trilogy score here a little bit.
Danny Elfman with the animated series as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of that too. I think it's a pretty good sort of meshing of, and honestly, it's been a really long time since I saw the Tim Burton Batman movies, but Danny Elfman's work on that potentially as well. It is a really, really neat sort of mishmash of styles that Batman music has had a lot of styles because, he's been around since before World War II. That's the most interesting part of this song to me, is that it does feel like a combination of all the previous sort of stylizations that he's had. The only one missing is probably the Adam West's series. I don't know if that would mesh well with anything else, but that doesn't mean I don't want to hear them try.
Yeah. No, I feel it's definitely darker than the Adam West, but you're right. It's the good combination there. Let's get to number 2 on the Critical 5, and this one is Fallout. Really neat piece here. It plays as the ending music of episode 1, where you're seeing the fallout from your decisions and the big revelation that Batman discovers at the end of the episode. So a really neat piece that starts overall as this nice little piano lick and then just builds more layers on top of it. I mean, adding strings under it and then really building intensity. By the end of it, when it's like the big, sort of verbal confrontation of the end of that kind of cutscene where you're seeing all the ramifications, like that's big tension there. And it's just a really cool crescendo throughout the 2.5 minutes of the piece.
Yeah, I really dig the build up there. Of course, I like the beginning most of all because I have one thing on my personality sheet, and that's piano. It's the only word. And I love me some like really nice piano pieces. I don't know what the actual like context of this is, but it does definitely sort of bring across that tone of like significant happenings, I guess, like a status quo change or something around there. And I think that's very interesting and very neat that that's able to be so easily portrayed by a song.
Yep, you got it. I think it's a neat take on the lore and just kind of twist one big thing and see like what ramifications would be and how that would affect other things in the Batman story. It's really neat. Number 3 on the Critical 5, though, let's get into some combat music. And this is Fighting Two-Face. What? A game that has Harvey Dent in it is oh no, he turns into Two-Face. Oh no.
Next
what?
You're going to tell me that Otto Octavius is Dr. Octopus.
Unbelievable. So, yes, in episode 3, there's a confrontation with Harvey, with Two-Face, and this is that music, and it sounds really cool. You know what it actually reminds me of, though? It's like Mass Effect combat music. It doesn't go into like the big heavy synths and all that, but like the pace of it and kind of like the brooding tension of it, I kind of feel a little bit of Mass Effect to it. I don't know if that's like the right comparison to make, but that's kind of what I get when I listen to this. And this is great. I mean, the range of the score is fantastic, and you got to have like good action here, but it's not like the biggest high stakes. We'll get to that later, but just a good action piece moment.
Yeah, it's really good. I think the Mass Effect comparison is apt. It's the battle music for the playthrough of Mass Effect where you flip a coin to decide whether or not you're going to answer Paragon or Renegade for that option. That sounds... Would that even work? I don't even know. But yeah, I think this is my favorite overall. It's weird to say this is the simplest, but it kind of is. I mean, it's confrontation music, and it sounds sort of similar to something you'd hear in like Arkham, the Arkham series.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just the general vibe I get. It's a very well put together piece of combat music.
Absolutely. It's action set PC, and it supports that well. I was torn between a couple tracks for number 4 here on the Critical 5, but we're going to go with a bit more of a spoilery one. So if that's your thing, probably avoid it. It's not a big spoiler, honestly, because if you couldn't have guessed when I was talking about a John Doe, number 4 on the Critical 5 is Joker.
Yeah, pretty much the instant you said his name was John Doe, I figured it was probably that.
And it's a Batman game, right? Like, a Batman game has to eventually explore the Joker relationship.
And when it's a dude who just happens to not have a real name.
Yeah. Exactly. So at the end of episode 3, and just a great cliffhanger twist on that one, Bruce finds himself in a confrontation with one John Doe. And this is a John Doe before he is the Joker. The appearance is clear. The laugh and mannerisms are clear. But there is not the criminal element to him yet. And this piece is just delicious. This one may be my favorite as far as like giving flashbacks and chills. Like this detuned piano with great environmental noises to it. It's just incredible and makes me think of the interactions with the character, but also then going into the sequel with the enemy within and how you get to shape that character. Does he become the full psychopath or a different kind of Joker? It's fascinating, and this piece really established one of the standout performances in the game.
This is a very, very close second for me, simply because this is I'm just gonna decide that you put this on here for me. The discordant piano and this sort of uneasy feel. I absolutely love the Joker as a character, though the portrayal is not always a winner. Like, the Batman, not the movie, the show, where he's like a weird gorilla man. It was odd. But for the most part, like, Joker is always one of the more interesting aspects of a Batman story. Usually more interesting than Batman. So this theme sort of giving this off-kilter feeling of he's not the Joker yet, but you can tell. I think that's really masterfully well done in this track.
If you love the Joker, you need to play these games. Like, full stop, bar none. Like, it's one of the best Joker stories I think that's been told. It was between this and there's a track called The Waynes, which kind of explores Bruce's relationship with his parents, but it's done through like this music box. So it's either music box or detuned piano, and I feel like this one represents one of the biggest strengths of the game. To wrap up number 5 on the Critical 5 tracks, though, for Batman the Telltale Series, this is Lady Arkham Action.
We talked about Dark Souls last week. Why is there a Dark Souls song here?
It kind of does sound like that, right? Obviously, gameplay much easier than Dark Souls. You just got to be good at timing your button presses and the prompts that you are given. But this is one where it's, as far as like the PC rip, it's Muse Loop, Lady Arkham Action, 02D for this version in particular that has kind of the higher stakes, but yes, the final boss confrontation with Lady Arkham. This is like another example of like good combat music, especially for this game, but this is the higher stakes with the final confrontation. So it's good to compare to the Two-Face track. And I just like this one. It's a good way to represent that whole arc with Lady Arkham. Really, really good.
I like it, but I do still think that the Two-Face battle music is better.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels a little bit better to me. Like I said, this sounds like I should be fighting a dragon that is angry and doesn't have scales or whatever the hell dragons do in Dark Souls. I don't actually know. I've never made it far enough to see one.
Who says Lady Arkham isn't a dragon?
She could be a dragon. There are dragons in the DC universe, I think, probably. Yeah, it's good. It's just, I think, I also just don't know who Lady Arkham is, so that might be part of it. I know Two-Face. I don't know Lady Arkham, so that might play a part in how I feel about it.
A character specifically for this game. Interesting. Let's get to a couple tracks on the cutting room floor, though, and these involve a certain character. Let's get to Selena. A nice, slow, brooding piece to represent Catwoman's leitmotif for Selena Kyle. And just another amazing performance from Laura Bailey to represent this character. The whole dynamic of, do you pursue a relationship with Selena Kyle even though she's with Harvey Dent, and the ramifications of what could happen. It's definitely a big push and pull, makes for a huge decision at the end of episode 2. And I think it's just a really cool vibe, this one. Kind of like a jazzy, almost lounge track, especially with the piano there. But again, just a nice, good example of the range in this soundtrack.
It being really subdued is a very good idea, seeing as it is Catwoman. And she's a thief that works in the shadows for the most part. I think that thematically fits in there very well. I like it.
Especially, with the femme fatale role there. The other one is much more fun, and this is the stacked deck. Interesting to get some electric guitar in there. The stacked deck is a bar that Bruce is trying to find Selena at in episode 2. And oh, look, Penguin's goons came after her. So they have to have a team-up fight sequence. And this plays especially near the end of the piece in the clip that's represented as the action picks up. The drums go more wild and gives a really good pace for another great action sequence. But it's a really different sounding piece, and especially at the beginning of the piece, the vibe is more chill and like it's almost like a band playing in the bar. But as the action picks up, so does the piece. And wow, again, sounds different, but really like this one.
So when I read that it was a bar fight, I was gonna go, oh, it's not gonna be guitar, so like what's the point? That's the law. When you have a bar fight, there has to be like twangy guitar. Pleasantly surprised. Happy.
Yeah, it's a great one. I think it rounds out the selections well. So what will I never forget about Batman, the Telltale series? I think, honestly, it's like the big twists in the game. The big one at the end of episode 1, the decision you have to make at the end of episode 2, the fantastic reveal at the end of episode 3, and then you go on episode 4 and it's John Doe, and oh man, like it just adds a whole other layer to the game that they build in the sequel. Yeah, it rounds out okay, but I think it's just the crescendo up to that action that is just so well done. I really enjoy this game, and I feel like it's one of those games where, yeah, reviews didn't rate it too highly, but it was certainly in my top 10 favorite games of 2016, and wow, yeah, absolutely. Just really appreciate this game. I think as a Joker fan, Joe, like, you got to play it. This one at least, but the work they do with Joker and Anthony and Gruber's performance is so well done, especially in the sequel.
Yeah, like I said, I'm pretty sure I own it somewhere, so we will have to see if I end up giving it a shot.
All right, to transition to our next game, we like to highlight a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on YouTube, OC Remix, wherever. Didn't expect to find too much. But then on YouTube, Sarim Tashfeen, SAARIM did an electric guitar cover of that main Batman theme. And he called it Batman Telltale OST. But I was surprised to find this cover. Really neat. So please enjoy that. We'll be right back.
All right, let's change completely what we're talking about, because we're going not only back to the age-old handheld days of the Game Boy Advance, but also it's a fantasy game about children. We're going to talk about Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. It was originally released for Game Boy Advance on February 14th, 2003 in Japan, September 8th, 2003 in North America, and then October 24th, 2003 in the PAL regions. It can actually be played, for now, on the Wii U Virtual Console service. It was released there on January 28th, 2016. If you want to grab it on that, you should do that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, while you still can.
Yeah. It was developed by Square. They actually self-published it in Japan, but it was published by Nintendo everywhere else. Fun fact, in Japan, the box was labeled as being a production of Squaresoft. But everywhere else, it's marked as Square Enix, because literally between the Japanese release and the North American release, smack dab in the middle of that, was the legendary merger of Square and Enix. So I found that to be kind of an interesting thing. I couldn't find if it was like the first release here that had the Square Enix branding on it, but it was at the very least one of the first ones that came out. It is a strategy role-playing game, slightly similar to Nintendo's Fire Emblem, but only slightly. It's more similar to Square's own Final Fantasy Tactics, which was a PlayStation 1 strategy RPG that they released in 1997. Eventually, we should probably touch on that game, because it's up there as, like, some people call it one of the best games ever made.
But it's rumored to be one of those could be getting the remastered treatment, like Chrono Cross. There was that whole NVIDIA GeForce leak, so you maybe put a pin in that one.
Yeah, keep that in the holster for now. Unlike Fire Emblem, maps in Tactics Advance are relatively small. They're seen from an isometric perspective, and different tiles have different elevations that can be climbed or ascended. Like, they're sort of 3D maps in that way. Fire Emblem does like terrain types and stuff like that, but that's really about as far as it goes. This one is like, there are grid lines where it's raised high enough that if you get high enough above somebody, you can't hit them and stuff like that. It makes it very interesting. Characters move on a turn-based system, depending on their speed stat, mostly, so it's not all your turn and then all the enemy turn, etc., etc. After a turn is over, the player must also then choose which direction the character will end their turn facing, something I did not know until one of the Steam Festival demos that was very obviously made by somebody who was a big fan of the tactics games had that same function. Because if you attack somebody from the side or back, it is potentially more damaging, but also makes it easier to hit them. And that goes for your characters as well. So a really interesting sort of aspect in there that Fire Emblem entirely does not have.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of gameplay stuff we could be talking about here. So this is one of those weird moments where it's like, I didn't want to look too deeply into it because this is a game I very much would like to play one day. Just haven't gotten around to it. Who knows when I will. Things that I did notice while reading up how the game played, though, the map is populated by the player. You basically earn tokens that can be placed on different spots in the map that decide, like, what is the terrain in that area like? Or there's a job system in this game. Of course, Final Fantasy always has done interesting things with job systems. More recently, it's been the territory of the Bravely Default games. But there are 34 jobs in Tactics Advance, and characters earn AP through completed battles that, when built up enough, give them permanent access to one of that job's abilities, which sounds very similar to how Final Fantasy IX handles abilities.
Yeah, is that ability points for AP?
Yeah, I believe that's what it stands for, but I could not find an explanation for that one. But in FF9, abilities are attached to equipment, and you get AP when they win a battle wearing that equipment, and once they've fully mastered that equipment, they just get to keep that ability forever. So it's very similar to that. So Tactics Advance is also one of the many games that take place in the world of Ivalice. So Ivalice is a setting that was introduced in the original Final Fantasy Tactics. It also serves as the setting for Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy XII, both Tactics and Tactics Advance sequels, and it appears as a major location in Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood, where I believe like there's a whole side story there that is a legitimate official conclusion to the Final Fantasy Tactics series, like finishes the story of those games. I don't know anything past that, but that's insane.
Dang, Yoshi P, okay.
Yeah, just making sequels within his MMO. This game also marks the debut of the Viera. Are you aware of the Viera?
I only am aware of Fran in 12.
Yes, Fran is a Viera, and Fran is, the other main character of Final Fantasy XI, because it's not Vaughn. I don't remember his name.
Huh.
She's supposed to be. The story of 12, just to get on a slight tangent for a second, it was supposed to be about Balthier and Fran, and then Square's higher-ups were like, you need a young character so the kids will like him. And that's how we got Vaughn, and Vaughn sucks. Just a little bit of Final Fantasy XII trivia for you. One day I'll talk about that game. One of us might. I don't know. Anyways, the Viera were introduced in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which I did not actually know until doing this research. They're a race of bunny people, and they've since shown up in various spin-offs to the series. Most recently, they are a playable race in Final Fantasy XIV, originally female only, but male Viera were added with Endwalker.
Get bunny ears and everything.
It's sure a thing. In terms of the plot, I'm just going to quote Wikipedia for a second here. Quote, Ivalice is a world created by 4 ordinary children. Marsh Reduju, a new student and resident of St. Ivalice and its school, Mute Randell, a shy boy still attached to the memory of his late mother, Ritz Malher, an assertive and outspoken classmate of March and Mute, and Doned Radiju, March's younger handicapped brother and a big fan of fantasy novels and video games. Mute comes across a dusty old tome in a local used bookstore and eagerly wishes to show it to his friends. Unaware that the book is the legendary Grand Grimoire, Mute brings the book over to March's house along with Ritz. The book is written in a language none of them have ever seen before, and a single inscription reads, Alta Oran Sandas Kamea. The next morning, March wakes up in the world of Ivalice. The fantasy Ivalice is supposedly a reincarnation of Mute's memories from a Final Fantasy game. That's right, everybody. The plot of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is basically one of the modern Jumanji movies.
Yeah, it's like Jumanji meets an isekai.
Yeah, pretty much. Which I also did not know until I did this research. So from there, March begins a quest in Ivalice, with his main goal to get him and his friends, who have also been transported there, back home. The problem is, he might have some trouble convincing his friends to leave Ivalice, because they've actually found that they have better lives there. So, how is he going to handle that? That's the main question that I can, as far as I can tell, in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. And that's where I will ask, hey, what are our experiences with Final Fantasy Tactics Advance?
I did not really know that there was a Tactics Advance game, though I guess if you say FFTA, then like, okay, yeah, that acronym kind of sounds familiar. But yeah, you hear Final Fantasy Tactics talked up all the time as one of the best strategy RPGs ever, among conversation for best games ever, and I have not played it because of my limited experience and exposure to that genre.
I have never played this or the original. Fire Emblem was basically the only tactical RPG I've ever played, ever.
Right, yeah.
Which, I should probably get on that at some point, but who knows? Especially if there's potentially a remake of Tactics coming, might be a good time to jump in and give it a shot. But Tactics Advance is a different game, though at first it was rumored that it was just going to be a port to the GBA of the PS1 game, which it is not. It's a completely different game. I have always heard this game talked up as it's considered one of the best Game Boy Advance games, just in general, which is crazy because I believe in terms of handheld, does the GBA still have the biggest library of all time? I want to say it does. DS might have given it a run for its money, and depending on how you count Switch, that has probably overtaken it. But I know that Game Boy Advance was up there for a real long time. And so I see a lot of people be like, yeah, this is one of the best games on the platform, bar none. The thing I've always heard about it, though, is the tutorial battle, which is a snowball fight. And I've always heard people be like, yeah, it's one of the most interesting ways to teach somebody how to play a tactical RPG I've ever seen. And I don't know how accurate that is, but the snowball fight scene has been one of those things that I've been told about ad nauseum for years. And it's basically the only thing I know about Tactics Advance, or at least that was the only thing I knew before doing this research. So, this game, like I said, originally was rumored to be a port of Final Fantasy Tactics, but obviously did not end up being that. The team behind Tactics Advance was made up almost entirely of people from the studio Quest Corporation, which Square had bought in 2002. Quest was most well known back in the day for their Tactics Ogre series, which was another very big tactical RPG game that I've also never played. I think I owned a PSP copy of one of them at one point, like a remake of one of them at some point. But former members of Quest had actually already moved to Square in the mid-90s, and they had, unsurprisingly, sat down and worked on games like Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story. So, rumors about this game's existence in general was sort of rumored when Square announced that they had made a publishing deal with Nintendo, something that was kind of seen as a sign that the two companies were mending their relationship after, the whole Fallout, RE, Final Fantasy VII, and the Nintendo 64, and Square essentially becoming a PlayStation exclusive developer for a really long time. There's not a lot of information on this game's development, weirdly enough. Though I did find out that the plot was actually adapted into a radio drama that was broadcast on 4 radio stations in Japan over the course of early 2003. I believe it was done airing before the game had even come out outside of Japan.
Oh,
and
weird.
It started airing before the game came out in Japan. That's the weirdest part. But yeah, radio dramas are a big thing over there, from what I know. It was received really well upon release, 87 on Metacritic currently. As of 2006, it was the 40th highest selling game on the GBA in just the United States. Won Best Handheld Game at DICE, which was AIAA at the time. And like I have said a couple of times, it's often regarded as like one of the best games for GBA, period, just in general. It consistently shows up on lists of the best GBA games. People really, really, really like this game, this series. It did get a sequel, which I find really funny because it released on the Nintendo DS. So how did they get around the fact that Advance is in the title? Well, the game's called Final Fantasy Tactics A2, Grimoire of the Rift. So, clever dodge there. Characters from the original Tactics Advance actually appear as cameos in this sequel, and one of the characters from the game actually makes an appearance as a clan leader in Final Fantasy XII. So, they're very influential in terms of Square, even. So, the music, pretty much for all of the Tactics games, and a good amount of other stuff, was composed by Hitoshi Sakimoto. He was born on February 26, 1969 in Tokyo, Japan. He began teaching himself piano and electric organ in elementary school. They didn't say electone, but I'm going to assume electone. He even joined brass and rock bands with these self-taught skills. Like, he didn't have a teacher. He just taught himself how to play the piano as a child. In junior high, he and a group of friends began making their own games, and Sakimoto's original goal was to be a game programmer. He wanted to code stuff. And in high school, he wrote for the magazine OFM, that's OH exclamation point, FM, which was apparently a computer magazine in Japan that allowed him to write about different pieces of game music that he liked. And he began composing for games when he was 16.
Oh my gosh.
And doing so was actually his first jump into composing music at all. In 1988, he and a friend worked on the music for the arcade shooter Revolter, and for this project, Sakimoto even created a synthesizer driver called Terpsichorean that would end up being used throughout the games industry in the early 90s. He was 16.
Okay, so he's a prodigy. Got it.
Yeah. So his goal at that time was still to be a programmer, not a composer, but his friends and family were like, dude, no, you're really good at the music thing. You should do the music thing. Why don't you do the music thing? Eventually they convinced him to join there. And Revolter's soundtrack had actually gained him enough notoriety that he would be asked to compose for other games being made by various studios such as Toshiba, EMI, and Data East, with his first solo composing job being for a game I've never heard of, 1990's Bubble Ghost. What a time of game titles back then when they could just be called Bubble Ghost.
I keep getting amazed that we come across these names.
That game doesn't even have a Wikipedia article, or I would have gone to look at it. His career really picked up, though, with his work on the 1993 title Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen at Quest, and this began his long-standing working relationship with Yasumi Matsuno, who would continue to bring him on for projects both at Quest and then later when he left to join Square. His first international success came about due to his work on Final Fantasy Tactics, which led to him officially joining Square to work on Vagrant Story. During this time, he also worked on games for Quest and Capcom, and then he left Square in 2002 to start his own company, Basisscape. Basisscape is, at least according to Wikipedia when this was written, it is now one of the largest independent video game music production studios in the world, and is well known for the creative freedom it gives to composers under its label. So that's cool, and he is still a very, very prominent member of the game music scene in Japan just because he is part of that company still. From what I understand, the way that it was explained in the wiki article, the way that Basisscape works is that it hires composers and then like a contract is not given to a specific composer. It is given to Basisscape as a company, and then the open call is who wants to work on this? And if anybody wants to work on it, even if it's like 1 or 2 tracks, they get to work on it, which seems like a really interesting way of doing that business. And it sounds like, yeah, it gives a ton of creative freedom to the people that work under that umbrella. In terms of his discography, he's done like 60, 70 games just based on the list on Wikipedia in general. These are just the titles that stood out to me. Gauntlet 4, Super Back to the Future 2. I didn't know there were Super Back to the Future games. The Ogre Battle series, where he did music for The March of the Black Queen, Let Us Cling Together, Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber, and The Knight of Lotus. He did the music, obviously, for Final Fantasy Tactics, Advance, A2, and War of the Lions, Radiant, Silvergun, Vagrant Story, Tekken Advance and Tekken 6, Breath of Fire, Dragon Quarter, Gradius 5, multiple Bleach games? Like the anime Bleach?
Oh yeah, they had games, that's for sure, yeah.
Yeah, he worked on almost all of them, it seems, which is weird. Final Fantasy XII, Grim Grimoire, Odin Sphere, Valkyria Chronicles 1 through 4, The Wizard of Oz Beyond the Yellow Brick Road, the Xseed developed JRPG based on The Wizard of Oz.
Wow.
Not a title I ever thought I'd see talked about ever again. Muramasa, The Demon Blade, Dragon's Crown, and his most recent credit is on the game 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim.
Oh my gosh, yeah, of course. One of the well-regarded soundtracks from that year, of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm. He has his finger in a lot of games nowadays. And again, after a point, most of those are essentially like, because the contract was given to Basisscape, but he was involved in all of those projects. It's nuts. In terms of historical development research, the main theme of Advance was composed by Nobuo Uematsu. It is not in the Critical 5, but I figured that was worth pointing out. He did one track for this game, and it was that one. A majority of the soundtrack was composed by Sakimoto, but some tracks were contributed to by Ayako Saso and Kaori Okoshi. This soundtrack got an official release, in Japan at least, that actually came on 2 discs. The first one was the GBA MIDIs, and the second one was an orchestrated version of the soundtrack. So that's kind of cool. That's all I could find in terms of how the music was made in this game. So let's jump into the 5 critical tracks, starting with Snow Dancing in the Schoolyard. So the first two critical tracks that I picked are mostly because I went and looked at what music plays in the snowball fight scene. Because again, that's like the thing that I see brought up the most when talking about this game. This plays in the cutscene before the snowball fight, where the kids are all interacting and one of them's getting bullied, I guess, and then a teacher comes out and is like, "Hey kids, stop fighting. Let's have a snowball fight." I don't know, I didn't pay super close attention, but I also just kind of really like this song because it sounds very Winter Wonderlandy. It fits in really well despite the fact that it plays during a schoolyard snowball fight and not a fantasy battle with swords and shields. And I think that's a really interesting thing that it's able to pull off.
It's a special feeling when you listen to a video game music track and you're like, I've heard this before. I didn't know where it was from. Maybe it was just like on a, even like a little trivia thing, like, oh, I'm going to play a bunch of songs and you got to type in what game it's from. Like, I've heard this before. And I think that's a really good accomplishment that you've got it right here in the Critical 5. Yeah, remarkable what you can do. The GBA and its MIDIs are pretty limited, but this still sounds really good, and it's like good instrument choices, and yeah, the almost like bell-like, the like sleigh bells sounding like, you're right. Mm-hmm. Winter Wonderland is a perfect description, and so when you set it up in that scene, that's so good. Wow, I wonder if that's the case for the rest of these.
Potentially. When you actually get into the snowball fight, the music that plays is critical track number 2, Companions That Surpassed Their Races. No, I don't know why it's called that. I have no idea. I also saw this around as Companions That Surpassed Their Tribe or their clan, but the official title is Surpassed Their Races. This song is, I'm going to assume, probably used in more than just a snowball fight, because it's a lot more like fantasy epic battle-y than you'd expect, but it also feels like it could fit in like, this is what the kids think the tone of this fight is, even though it's a stupid snowball fight in the middle of a schoolyard. I really, really dig it. And again, because it plays in the thing I hear people praise the most often, had to put it here.
I'm just here having an existential crisis because I've heard this too. Like, that's unbelievable. But if it is like that well regarded of a GBA game and I'm just totally clueless, then that's on me. But yeah, wow, this is so good. And you kind of get a little bit of the echoing from Snow Dancing in the Schoolyard. But you're right, it does take a shift more to like a normal fantasy battle that you'd expect. I could see this as like the main battle theme for sure.
Potentially. So for the next 2 tracks, I don't know where they play. I just know that one of them was suggested by somebody I know who has played the game, and the other came about just listening through the soundtrack myself and figuring out what sounded good. The one that was suggested by a friend who has played it is critical track number 3, Ivalice, The Other World. Again, I have no idea where exactly this plays I assume somewhere in Ivalice, but that's about as far as I can get. You know what instrument I don't hear on GBA very often? Bagpipes?
Yeah, what the heck?
Like, it caught me super out of left field, but like, yeah, no, there's bagpipes in this song, like GBA MIDI style bagpipes, and they sound weirdly good, honestly. And then the pan flute, you of course have that. This is a really, really good song, and it reminds me a lot, actually, of like music that I heard in Final Fantasy IX. Like, this feels very similar to some of the stuff you hear in like some of the big cities in that game. It's really neat. I think this is one of my favorite songs in the game.
Yeah, it does sound really good. I too am taken aback by the bagpipes. Oh, don't worry, I haven't heard this one before, so like it kind of stops there. I think there is just something about that snowball scene, right? So, but yeah, no, this one is really fascinating because yeah, we've heard so much as far as GBA music throughout our lives. On this show, even we've had several Game Boy Advance games, and never has a track sounded like this. I could see this as like maybe even in like an overworld theme. If it does even have an overworld or like a main menu of like you're interacting in the town. I don't know.
It's got like a map screen, but I don't know how overworldy it is in general. The one that sort of just jumped out at me while I was listening through the soundtrack in preparation for this episode is critical track number 4, Battle for Hope. This is actually the only song on the Critical 5 or Cutting Room Floor that is not by Hitoshi Sakimoto. This song was composed by Ayako Saso. And this is really, really cool. This sounds closer to something I'd hear in Fire Emblem, like GBA Fire Emblem, I think. But it's got this good pace to it. It feels determined. It feels hopeful. It's just a really good song. I don't really know what else to say about it. That snare drum MIDI, the GBA was weirdly good at snare. No other types of drums. Snare, though, good at that.
I agree that this is probably the most like a Fire Emblem or a traditional Final Fantasy. But again, I'm with you. I'm amazed by the quality of the MIDIs here. I'm trying to think, compare it to other Game Boy Advance games I've played. And like, yeah, the kind of lower bass notes are more GBA synth, but I'm so surprised by like the quality of the trumpet MIDI for the sound chip that it's on, knowing like Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald and trumpets everywhere. This trumpet sounds way better than those. And that's insane.
It's wild. Like, it's probably the best trumpet MIDI I've heard from before, I don't know, 2009? Yeah. 2010?
Before we got streaming audio on game consoles and handhelds, yeah.
And this was on a GBA. I assume it sounded more bit crushed on an actual GBA. The speakers on the GBA weren't very good. But the other song that was suggested to me by a friend, this one actually I was able to find out that it is the final battle music. It is critical track number 5, Incarnation. This is the intro at the very least sounds very FF7-ish. But for the most part, like, wow, this is the best song that I heard the entire time I was listening to the soundtrack. Like, I really like the Ivalice The Other World. This is the best one. It's so cool. It has like this really sinister drive to it. I have no idea the context or stakes behind this, but like listening to this song specifically, I'm just like, I should really play Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, huh?
It's so impressive. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most is the combination between the two worlds clashing. You have like the traditional instruments, but you also have like this virtual sounding, and that's like the whole synth chip, right? So it's the two kind of clashing with each other in this big confrontation. And I feel like if I had to guess, if you're trying to say, hey, come on, friends, let's actually go back home, and there probably, I'm sure, things in the way of making that happen, that feels very thematic.
And also it might just be like the clash between digital and quote unquote orchestral could also be representing the fact that they come from a world where Final Fantasy is a video game, and they're arguably in Final Fantasy.
Right.
So it could be like sort of that clashing ideals. There's a lot of places it could go. But overall, it's just a really, really good song. In terms of tracks on the cutting room floor, the first one, because it's a Final Fantasy game and you got to talk about these at some point, is Crystal. What? A Final Fantasy game has some form of crystal during its story? Unheard of. I just kind of like the song because it's very reverent and kind of has this otherworldly, mysterious feeling to it. Even more so than the other tracks in the game, which is weird because they're all technically the soundtrack to a in another mysterious world story. But I think this one really sort of nails that mystical feeling.
Yeah, it's building these heavy minor chords, but with these high-pitched instruments with the vocals and all that. It's an interesting clash there. YouTube comment says, one of the saddest moments in gaming.
Oh, boy.
So I'm going to guess there's context to it that we are both missing, but it sounds like it's a good pick on all fronts.
I just blindly stumbled into that. Yes, go me. I just put it there because it's a good song. Speaking of I just put it there because it's a good song, cutting room floor track number 2 is Tough Battle. I've also heard this referred to as Painful Battle. Tough Battle sounds a little bit better because you see the title Painful Battle and then it's this sort of bouncy, energetic, almost festival-like piece, and it does not fit that title at all in any way, shape, or form. But Tough Battle sounds a little bit better in that, like, yeah, no, this is a little bit harder than usual, but we're gonna get through it.
Oops, heard this one too. Well, here we go.
Sounds like we both need to play this game, huh?
Sure didn't know it was called Tough or Painful Battle. That is some whiplash right there.
Yeah.
But I can see slightly higher stakes, but my goodness, it also sounds like it could be not the instrument quality, of course, but it could be like, I almost get like the vibe of like Winnie the Pooh in Kingdom Hearts. Like, I don't know, like that kind of bouncy, fun, positive energy. It's interesting. Wow. Huh.
Well, it reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever seen the intro of Final Fantasy IX. One of the very first parts is you're put in control of Vivi, who is running through this town trying to get a ticket to go watch the big theater troupe's show. And it's this big deal in the entire town. And like, you can feel that the whole town is excited and it's almost like a festival. And that's what I get from this song, that type of scene. So it still doesn't quite fit with the title of Tough Battle, but Painful Battle, it at least doesn't at all fit.
No, yeah, that's for sure.
So what will I never forget about Final Fantasy Tactics Advance? I don't know, because I haven't played it. Doing research for this game is another time where it's like, maybe I should, but also just, I never stop hearing about that damn snowball fight, and I need to know. I want to know.
Yeah, it's clearly an important game that I knew zero about. I'm more interested in hearing more of the music now that I apparently know 3 tracks, or I have heard of 3 tracks. So that's something. Wow. Interesting. You definitely hear of people being inspired by this game with like the isekai elements and all that. And just building off a staple in Final Fantasy Tactics.
One of these days I'm going to play it. If you want to play it, everybody, remember, go buy it like now, because you won't be able to soon.
That's right. If you still got a Wii U kicking around, you can play it there. You can't play Batman the Telltale Series there on your Wii U, though. But still, these are both games where you make these critical decisions in these wildly different genres from what the usual fare is for these franchises. With Batman the Telltale Series and Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. And that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. It's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasherpieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes. But we also have a Spotify playlist, where if we talk about a track on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this monster playlist. Joe, is there anything new on that Spotify playlist?
Unfortunately, both of the games we talked about this week are not on Spotify. But as of a couple days ago at time of recording, Persona 5 Royal and Persona 5 Strikers have been added to Spotify. So music from both of those games ended up on the playlist, mostly because Persona 5 Royal was on the Best of 2020 episode and Strikers was on the Best of 2021. And also, Strikers being there means that for the first time ever, all 10 of our top 10 for Best of 2021 are on the service. So I went ahead and also made a playlist of all of the tracks in order from 10 to 1. And you can go listen to that all the way through. I did, and it's a really, really interesting sort of going from Imposter Factory straight into Halo is a hell of an experience, and it only picks up from there.
Yeah, I think you called it OSC Best of 2021 Top 10.
Yes.
Yeah, so go and search and find it there. And when you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. You can leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? Also, leave us some suggestions for games to cover this year. It's another push of ours. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Next week, I'm going to be talking about Thomas Happ.
I will be talking about Satomi Terui. All right, Joe, let's play us out.
So, I didn't really know where to look until long after my research on the game had concluded in order to find a good remix for the song, but then I heard Incarnation and was like, oh, it has to be that. That's the one it has to be. And I managed to find a remix of it by a YouTuber, Ixyled, Ixyled. Don't know how to pronounce that, but that's who did this cover of Incarnation. I hope you enjoy.
Thanks so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.